Gospel of Mark has a very interesting ending. Jesus has been crucified and buried. On the third day, the women go to the tomb, but they find the tomb empty. They see a man there in the tomb, and the man tells them to go tell the disciples that Jesus will go before them to Galilee. They're to meet him there. So Jesus has been raised. They're to meet him in Galilee. Then Mark chapter 16, verse 8 says, "But the women fled the tomb and didn't say anything to anyone, for they were afraid." That's where the gospel ends in the oldest and best manuscripts. The women don't tell anybody, and Jesus never appears to the disciples. Boom, end of story. Which is a fascinating ending. It's a brilliant ending for the Gospel of Mark, where nobody can figure out who Jesus is, and at the end, they still don't figure out who he is, because they're not told that he's been raised from the dead. Terrific ending. Some scribes, though, were really taken up short when they got to that ending and thought, wait a second, Jesus surely appeared to people. Surely there were resurrection appearances. And so, a number of scribes added endings to the Gospel of Mark, including the ending that's found in most of our English Bibles. Like the story of the woman taken in adultery, in most modern English Bibles, you'll find that this ending is put in brackets. So the translator is telling you this is not an original ending, but is an ending that's been added on. In the added on ending, there are 12 verses in which Jesus appears to his disciples. And in these verses, he tells them to go make disciples of all the nations. And he says that anybody who believes in my name will drink deadly poison, and they'll take up deadly snakes, and they won't hurt them. This is the passage that Appalachian snake handlers use to justify their handling of poisonous snakes. The problem is, it wasn't originally in the Gospel of Mark. This is a later scribal addition. No wonder some of these people end up in the hospital. It's not part of the Bible. This is a later addition. The Gospel of Mark originally ended with the women fleeing the tomb because they were afraid. In the Gospel of Luke, we saw that when Jesus is being nailed to the cross, he prays to God, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." There's an interesting variant at this point. In some of our best manuscripts, Jesus doesn't pray this prayer, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." Why would a scribe change the text? Why would a scribe take out that prayer? It's interesting that in the early church, this prayer was read as interpreted as a prayer for God to forgive the Jews for their guilt in turning Jesus over to be executed. Well, if that's how it's interpreted, it's not surprising that scribes took it out. Scribes in an age that had grown increasingly anti-Jewish didn't want Jesus to pray for the forgiveness of the Jews, since God obviously hadn't forgiven the Jews, and so they took out Jesus' prayer for the Jews.